The December cold makes the iron chains burn against your skin, a cruel paradox where metal becomes fire through frost alone. You're 16 years old, dragged through snow-covered streets to a stone chamber buried beneath the cathedral. Your breath clouds the air in front of your face, but soon you won't be breathing at all. Not properly. Not without screaming first. The torture chamber in medieval winter is a special kind of hell. The moisture in the air freezes on the walls, creating sheets of ice that glisten in torchlight. The device is racks, wheels, chairs of iron spikes are so cold they stick to flesh on contact, tearing skin when you're finally unbound. If you're lucky, frostbite will numb your extremities before they start the real work. If you're not, the cold will keep you conscious longer, unable to retreat into shock while they break your body piece by piece. But here's what you need to understand. You're not here because you committed a crime. You're here because someone needed you gone. Maybe you inherited land your neighbor wanted. Maybe you refused a powerful man's advances. Maybe you were simply too educated, too beautiful, too outspoken, or too poor to defend yourself. In medieval Europe, being born female meant existing in a permanent state of accusation, and the torture chamber was where accusations became verdicts without trial, evidence, or mercy. They bring her in just after dawn, the coldest hour, when the frost on the dungeon walls is thickest. She's wearing only a thin shift, no shoes, no cloak. Within minutes, her lips turn blue, her feet leave bloody prints on the frozen stone floor. The men surrounding her wear the robes of churchmen and carry the tools of executioners. One holds a scroll listing her crimes: adultery, witchcraft, speaking against her husband, refusing to confess to sins she didn't commit. The specific charge doesn't matter. What matters is that 3 men testified against her, and under medieval law, a woman's word counted for nothing against a man's testimony. They didn't even need evidence, just accusation. And now she's here, in this chamber that smells of old blood, mold, and the sharp metallic scent of fear. The brazier in the corner glows orange, the only source of heat in the entire room. But that heat isn't meant to warm. It's meant to prepare the iron implements, the brands, the pincers, the claws that will soon be pressed against her skin. She knows what's coming. Every woman in medieval Europe knew. They'd all seen the public executions, heard the screams echoing from castle dungeons, watched neighbors dragged away and never returned. The torture chamber wasn't a secret. It was a promise hanging over every woman's head. Step out of line, and this is your future. The rack dominates the center of the room like an altar to suffering. It's surprisingly simple in design, just a wooden frame with rollers at each end, ropes, and a ratchet mechanism. But simplicity made it effective. Complicated machines broke. The rack just worked. They force her onto it, binding her wrists to one roller, her ankles to the other. The ropes are hemp, rough enough to scrape skin raw before the stretching even begins. In the February cold of 1457, records from York Castle describe a woman named Margaret Clement stretched on the rack for refusing to name her accomplices in an alleged conspiracy. There were no accomplices. Margaret was a midwife who'd helped deliver the baby of a nobleman's mistress, a baby the nobleman needed to disappear. When Margaret refused to claim the child was stillborn, they brought her here. The executioner turns the handle. 1 click. Her body tenses. 2 clicks. The ropes tighten, pulling her limbs in opposite directions. 3 clicks. She feels her joints begin to separate, shoulders first, then hips, a sensation like being torn apart from the inside. By the 10th click, her shoulders have dislocated with a wet popping sound that makes even the guards wince. By the 20th, her hip sockets are empty, bones pulled completely free. She's still conscious. That's the genius of the rack. It destroys the body while keeping the victim aware of every single moment. Here's what the history books won't tell you clearly. Over 60% of documented rack torture victims in medieval England were women, and of those women, fewer than 10% ever walked again. Most died within weeks from infection, internal bleeding, or complications from having their bodies literally pulled apart. The lucky ones, if you can call them lucky, were left permanently disabled, unable to feed themselves, unable to work. begging on church steps for the rest of their shortened lives. But the rack wasn't designed to kill quickly. It was designed to extract confessions, and medieval law had a peculiar logic. If you confessed under torture, you were guilty. If you didn't confess, they simply hadn't tortured you enough yet. Margaret Clement lasted 4 hours on the rack before she confessed to whatever they wanted. She admitted to witchcraft, to poisoning the nobleman's wife, to consorting with demons, none of which she'd done. She confessed because her body had been destroyed so thoroughly that staying silent meant more pain, and her mind couldn't process any option beyond making it stop. They burned her at the stake 3 days later. She couldn't stand, so they tied her to the stake sitting down. And as the flames rose, the official church record noted that she'd died repentant of her sins. But here's the truly horrifying part. This wasn't unusual. This was standard procedure. Now imagine something worse than the rack, if you can. Imagine torture designed not just to break your body, but to destroy your identity as a woman. They called it the breast ripper iron claws, 4 curved prongs, sometimes heated red hot over the brazier. In the winter months, the contrast between freezing air and burning metal made the pain indescribable. The device was used almost exclusively on women accused of adultery, abortion, heresy, or the crime of being too sexually attractive to local men. That last one wasn't even a formal charge, it was just something priests wrote in their records when they needed an excuse. The breast ripper had 2 variations. The first was used in public executions. The woman was stripped to the waist. The iron claws were heated until they glowed, then slowly dragged across her breasts until the flesh tore away completely. The second variation was used in interrogations. Cold iron pressed against the breast, then twisted and pulled in a wrenching motion designed to cause maximum pain without killing immediately. Records from 15th century France describe a woman named Jeanne Roux who survived the breast ripper only to die 3 weeks later from infection. The wounds never healed properly. Medieval medicine had no concept of sterilization or antibiotics. Her flesh rotted while she was still alive, turning black and filling the cell with the smell of decay. She spent her final days in that frozen dungeon, unable to move, the chains cutting into her wrists, while gangrene consumed her body. But physical mutilation was only part of the punishment. The breast ripper was designed to destroy a woman's femininity, to make her body into something monstrous. In medieval culture, breasts symbolized motherhood, nurturing, female virtue. To tear them away was to say, you are no longer a woman, you are no longer human, you are nothing but a warning to others. Women who survived were marked for life. They couldn't nurse children. They couldn't marry, no man would take a wife, so visibly damaged. They couldn't work most jobs that required physical labor. They became social outcasts, living evidence of what happened when women didn't conform. And that was the point. The torture wasn't really about the individual woman strapped to the device. It was about every woman watching, every daughter learning what happened to those who spoke too loudly, loved too freely, or challenged male authority in any way. The breast ripper didn't just tear flesh, it tore resistance out of entire communities. And it worked. In towns where public breast-ripping executions took place, historical records show a measurable drop in women reporting domestic violence, refusing arranged marriages, or speaking out in any public capacity. Fear was the most effective torture device ever created. Everything else was just the mechanism of delivery. Then there was the pear of anguish, a device so intimate in its cruelty that even medieval executioners spoke of it in whispers. It looked deceptively simple. A metal bulb divided into segments with a screw mechanism at the base. But when that screw turned, the segments expanded like a grotesque flower blooming inside the body. It was inserted into the mouth for women accused of lying or blasphemy, into the vagina for women accused of adultery or unnatural lust, into the anus for those accused of sodomy. The expansion was gradual, one turn of the screw at a time. The segments would press outward, tearing soft tissue, breaking jawbones, rupturing internal organs. The winter cold made it worse. Metal contracted in freezing temperatures, meaning the device had to be warmed by the executioner's hands before insertion. But body heat would make it expand slightly once inside, creating pressure even before the screw was turned.